All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of React Wednesdays. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate at Blues Wireless. With me, as always, Dan Wilson. Dan, how's it going, man?
Hey, it is going good. I'm Dan Wilson, and I also work at Blues Wireless.
Yeah, well, if you're new here, React Wednesdays is a show. We run this every week, every Wednesday, as the name sort of implies. And basically, it's an hour-long stream. We bring in someone cool from around the React, from around the JavaScript worlds, and we have them teach us, have them show us something really cool. Now, if you want to keep track of the show, know what's coming up, you can head to telerik.com/react-wednesdays, which I'm going to drop in the chat right now. There's a way you can add the show to your calendar so you can know of upcoming episodes. We don't have any on the schedule right now because we've got a bit of a holiday coming up in the US, Labor Day for those of you here. So I don't know about you, Dan. I'll be vacationing next week, so I will be out for a bit.
I will be doing something that isn't standing in front of a bright light looking into a camera.
Well, there you go. So we'll be off next week, but this week we do have a show and we have a really fun guest and a topic that I at least am very excited for. So I want to welcome Nate Moore to the show. Nate, how's it going?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's going great.
Yeah, welcome. And why don't you tell people, for those of you that aren't familiar, who you are, what you do, all that good sort of stuff.
Yeah. So my name's Nate Moore. I'm a developer at Skypack. That's the team behind Skypack, the ESM CDN, and Snowpack. And right now we're working on Astro, which is this really exciting new static site generator. So really pumped to talk about it today.
Yeah, I feel like you're doing lots of interesting stuff because I feel like that whole team, like Snowpack, Skypack, Astro, like all of these things are doing quite well. So I am curious what your secret is, but maybe you could just start by telling us, since we want to focus on Astro here today, like why build Astro, right? Like why does it make sense for your company? And also like, why does it make sense for the JavaScript world? Like what is it doing that other tools aren't doing today?
Totally. I was just looking back like at our commits. I think our first commit was in March of this year. So we kind of started working on Astro because we wanted, so many people have built a static site generator. There are a lot of them out there. It wasn't really like, we need another static site generator. It was kind of that we were not thrilled with the way JavaScript was heading. There's a lot of static site generators right now that generate, this phenomenal developer experience. And then as soon as you build it, you're kind of handing it off to the client side, and there's a lot of JavaScript running. It's really expensive. And for static content, we just didn't see a need for that. And we really think about the web as there's apps and there's documents. And when you're building for the document web, your blog or a landing page or e-commerce stuff, do you really need all that JavaScript that's just re-rendering the same thing? We didn't think so. And that's kind of why we started building Astro.
Yeah, it's really appealing, the approach to me, because I've always thought this is a React show, React audience. React is very rarely the right choice for a blog or a really simple marketing site, because it's just, you don't really need it, right? It's adding in. Lots of times React comes with all sorts of tooling and setup and things to go around with it. And back in the day, my personal blog is built with Jekyll because I felt the same thing years ago, right? I don't want JavaScript involved with this. Mm-hmm. And Jekyll's okay, but it's also a Ruby-based tool. And so I'm a JavaScript developer, so I want to use JavaScript tools, but I don't want to ship JavaScript to my client. So
Totally.
This approach is super appealing to me.
Yeah, exactly. And even when, if you're reaching for React but you're building a blog, there's a reason you're reaching for React, because the developer tooling around it is so phenomenal. And it's such a great way to go. But the output, in our opinion, could be a lot better.
I from chat, I found a hammer, everything is a nail. It's good. Exactly. Yeah. You could technically build anything with React, right? If you try hard enough.
Yep.
And depending on how you look at it, there's a spectrum from like super static, no interactivity to amazingly interactive. And then there's this kind of gray middle where sometimes we call it page decoration or progressive enhancement. I'm sure we're going to get into this, but I want to make sure we cover that middle area because there's a lot of things that kind of fit in there that maybe don't have a great home.
For sure. Yeah, I saw in the chat there, somebody said I got a K-pop band when I searched Astro. Yeah, that we didn't really check that one first. We have a bad habit of
or
actually buy the CD. It funds development.
I was going to say, or you secretly also have a K-pop band.
It could be, yeah.
Like when I look at Nate Moore, I totally think K-pop star. That's about where it's at.
Well, I know you want to show some of this off, so maybe we could segue here to showing some of this because I want to see some of this in action.
For sure. Yeah, I have some slides to chat about first. I think it's a good intro. So, we're kind of talking about Astro. I think of it as like this next generation static site generator. So if you think of 11D, if you're familiar with that, like it's this really clean HTML first output. But like you were saying before, like sometimes you don't want to use, a different templating language. Like components feel like the right primitive for building sites, much to React's credit. And so it's kind of like a mix between 11D and like Next.js if you're using like export and getting all the static assets out at the end. We're also, all in on ESM. I think a lot of tools that were like in this weird transitionary period between CommonJS and ESM are like struggling to catch up a little bit. One of the nice things about starting to write this tool back in March is we're all in on ESM and really excited about that. And the ecosystem is definitely getting up to speed on that, which is great to see. And yeah, we're built on top of Snowpack, which is our other project. All of these were kind of born out of this like ESM is this like once in a lifetime opportunity where, the ecosystem needs to catch up, but, we can really improve tooling and kind of, since it's a break, like let's make the best of it and build some really cool tools. I
like that. I will say I like that it's like a consistent ethos with Snowpack in general. Like we had Fred from presumably your team on the show as well to talk about Snowpack, and it's the same sort of thing, right? Like even the name of Snowpack is like no Webpack, which it's just fun. Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the base of Astro. It's this new static site generator for this coming age of JavaScript, and it's also a bit of a framework. I put a question mark there because I don't know. I'll let you decide on that one. But we do have this .astro format, which is pretty familiar to JSX. We get a lot of questions about like, why not just use JSX? And one thing that's really important to us is being as close to HTML as possible. So if you just find an HTML snippet online, like you should just be able to copy and paste that in. And like, so Astro is a superset of HTML that adds, expressions, and you can do JSX like stuff, but it's not JavaScript first, it's HTML first.
It's funny. There's always a discussion between why reinvent something. Mm-hmm. And the answer seems to be like, our approach is different. And I'll be fair with you. Like JSX always threw me for a loop because I've been writing HTML for 2 decades.
Yeah.
And class is class unless it's not. And then it's class name. And I'm like, oh yeah, I did that yesterday and the day before.
Right.
Maybe it's my limited processing capability in between the old eardrums here. But, the ability to just kind of stick with what I like and don't have to think about means I can move faster and make less mistakes. What was it like building this .astro format? Did you borrow heavily from JSX? Did you greenfield it? Like, what was your approach here?
Yeah, totally. So we had been thinking a lot about that question of like, why reinvent the wheel? We didn't want to. Definitely if there was something out there that fit what we were looking for, we definitely would have used it. But yeah, we didn't take from JSX like the compiler. We actually were looking at Svelte a lot because that's very HTML heavy. And yeah, we just kind of started building the compiler, looked at a lot of patterns, and just settled on this format that we'll definitely talk about more when we get into it.
And so it sounds like this was one of the many decisions to optimize for static sites and not just JavaScript in general.
Totally. Yeah, there's actually, when I was chatting with Fred originally about this idea, I had made something called microsite, which was pretty similar to Next.js, but with a lot of these like islands architecture optimizations for really static stuff. And that was all JSX and everything. And Fred just asked me like, hey, do you think you could do that for like every framework? And I just kind of shook my head and I was like, no, there's no way you could do that. But the Astro file format kind of allowed us to do that because we own like how everything is compiled. So one of the super cool things it unlocks is all of these performance optimizations, the ability to mix like a Vue component with a React component, things like that. And we also have, patterns for data fetching. We'll definitely get into that, but it's basically just fetch, which is really nice. And then, there's a really gentle learning curve. That's something we've heard from people that they really like, that, I know JSX or I know HTML, and I was able to build an Astro site really quickly. So yeah, we've kind of talked about this a bit, but why would you build with Astro? So we're pretty performance obsessed. That was our huge motivation for building this. We like to say that we generate the bare minimum needed client-side JavaScript, which by default is 0. We don't think you should have any JavaScript by default. So each time you're including JavaScript that gets shipped to the client, it's an opt-in decision, and you have to like actually think about that. That's been really important for us.
Walk me through that. What does that mean in practical terms?
Yeah. So that means everything is statically rendered at build time. And then if you're pulling in, so pages are written with this .astro format, and you can import a React component. And when you do that, if you have like on-click handlers or something, nothing's going to happen, which feels really weird at first because it's just rendered to pure HTML. That feels really weird and it trips people up. And I totally understand that, but we also felt like it was the best default. So all you have to do is add an attribute that says client::load or visible. And I'll definitely show all these off. But once you add that attribute, like the JavaScript gets included and it's lazy loaded, and like we just handle everything for you. But you do have to make a decision. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of the like lazy loading primitives that we can chat more about. There's this term called islands architecture. I don't know if you have heard that, but Jason Miller of the Preact team wrote a great blog post about that kind of outlines this idea that it's kind of like the middle zone of what you were talking about earlier, that a lot of things are not totally static. They're not totally dynamic, but there's this middle ground. And this approach is saying like, okay, then leave the static parts alone. And like each dynamic piece should just be like a little island that deals with itself. So that's kind of what we've taken as like this really good approach to it. And Astro kind of builds on top of that and gives you the right primitives for dealing with that. The super cool thing about Astro, like I mentioned, is it's framework friendly. That's why it's hard to say like this is a new framework, because you already have your frameworks and we don't want to replace those. Like if you love React, which I'm sure most of your viewers do, if you love Vue, like you can use your existing components. You can even use them together on the same page, which might be heresy, but it's possible.
Horror.
I know. But that's great for like developer blogs because, you know, if you're showing off the difference between React and Vue, it's pretty hard to like load both on the page if they each control the entire page, right?
That's true. And plus, there's plenty of shops these days to just have a mix of frameworks for whatever reason. And, you know, having a feature like this where you can bring in different frameworks means more people can work on this app instead of it just being relegated to the React people or the Svelte people.
It also, it opens up this opportunity in the future. Like, say somebody comes out with the next Svelte or something, whatever the next big thing is. If you're using Astro, you're not locked into one particular way of doing everything, because Astro is the thing that's loading your data. Not like all of these React things. And now like, oh, we don't want to use React anymore. Got to throw that out, learn all this new stuff. Like what's the Svelte way of doing it? What's this? So being able to like seamlessly say like this new page, we're just going to use Svelte components. That's really cool because you can just incrementally migrate.
Yeah, and if I check the metrics here, let me just look again. Yeah, we've been on the air for 18 minutes and there are 324 new JavaScript frameworks.
Yeah.
Not all will succeed, by the way, but some will.
Yeah. So yeah, being able to like play around with that. I didn't put solid here, but I totally should mention that. I know you guys had Ryan on last week.
Yep. It's a solid framework, really.
Yeah. It is really cool. And we were super excited about it. So one thing we did is like worked with their community to make sure that we supported solid. And it's pretty easy to like, I don't know that there's any other tool because that's can run React and solid in the same app because they're both JSX. So like that's a confusing thing to handle because if you have your Webpack settings or whatever that say like, oh, compile every JSX file to React, we had to figure out like, how do you do this on a per file basis so that you could mix things. Cool. This is hopefully not boring, but I just wanted to chat about some of these terms because developers love their acronyms. So the big thing about Astro is that it's static rendering right now, but that's not going to be a limitation forever. We're imposing that limitation on ourselves for version 1. So we stabilize everything, and as soon as version 1's out, we're going to be working really hard to get server-side rendering, on demand, all that stuff going. But a typical React app probably uses client-side rendering and one of these two. So that's like, you have React Router, your Next Router, or something like that. And there's an interesting article by Jason Miller, Adi Osmani, about rendering on the web. So if you just Google rendering on the web, it'll definitely come up. But it's a really great article to read. It's a couple years old, but it definitely holds up. There's a lot of like performance implications to how you choose each of these. And the big thing that they talk about there is hydration. So what happens when you have a server-side rendered app and then you want it to be interactive on the client? That process is hydration. So you're basically doing a server render and then you're doing a client-side render. But there's this like 1 for the price of 2 problem here because all your data is on the server, you generate your view, and then you're shipping everything back to the client to regenerate everything, which just kind of seems like you're doing a lot of work and you're making everybody that visits your site, their phone has to do a lot of that work. So the alternative to that is partial hydration, which it's really progressive enhancement. It's a technique for, identifying like what little pieces of the app need to be interactive and then only hydrating those. So you're not going from like this entire page needs to be JavaScript. Like now that button has a click handler. Let's just load that button. And Astro kind of optimizes for this, and you're only sending down that button itself. And then there's one more thing I want to chat about before we jump into it. So there's a lot of like app architecture decisions you can make. I think one thing about the way we've been going with JavaScript is like SPAs kind of seem to be the default now, which is cool. Like they're really snappy. They're awesome if you have like embedded routes and all this complex navigation. But the old school approach, multi-page applications, like it's just an HTML file, and each load, you're just asking the server for the HTML and then loading that. Like there's merit to that approach too, especially for content-based sites. Like, do you really need a client-side router if you're just going from page to page?
Yeah, and I feel like over the history of time, like this is one of those things that developers have went like roller coaster, because back in the day, you could only, like before modern JavaScript frameworks, single page apps weren't even an option, right? So everything was a multi-page app. And then I feel like when SPAs became possible, like everybody just jumped on that train, and suddenly like everything was a SPA, whether it needed to be or not. And now, like, I feel like we've had a reckoning with that and have said, well, hey, like, does my restaurant's site where they have like the menu and an about page need to be a SPA? No, not really. It's just like, that's totally fine as an HTML page. And like, even like, lots of these static sites and these services are pushing the boundaries of like, you can actually do like a whole lot with this like old school model that is just more performant just by its very nature, or at least simpler, because if you're just dealing with HTML, it just removes a whole lot of complexity at various levels.
Totally. I'm blanking on the name. It was like a jQuery thing where you would fetch like the next page and then maybe PJAX, and then like pull that like.
We're gonna
every
pull
page is
TJ's jQuery card unless he can name this feature right
now. But like that's a way to do it too. Like you have a multi-page app, but you can still do client-side rendering and animation and all this stuff with a slightly different approach.
Yep.
But it's not a monolith. Like everything is kind of broken down into each page.
It's an interesting trade-off, because if you take a multi-page application, even roll it back to like the year 2000, each page load was the entire screen.
Yep.
But that's all that it was. And then when you walk it down to single page apps, here's the entire app, even if you just need 2 bits of functionality.
Totally.
And it's interesting to see people now sort of categorize these architectures into this makes the most sense given the trade-offs, instead of this is now the one true way.
Yeah, I think like they're both totally fair. And I think even thinking about Astro versus Next.js, like if you're building something highly dynamic and you have user authentication and there's a lot of server-side logic, like definitely use Next. It's awesome. If you just have a content site where like you're spitting out some markdown files, like I don't know if you need all of the bells and whistles that come with Next. But yeah, it's definitely a pendulum.
Yeah.
And it's wild to see things kind of swing back here. And we've kind of tried to adopt this ethos of like, it's not new. Like we're not claiming we invented all this stuff. It's been around for a long time. It's kind of the old way of doing things, but with like a very modern developer experience.
Once we chop up the video, you'll say, we invented all this. We'll have some JavaScript flame wars we can profit from. But I don't want to mention that up front.
Yeah. So then if you take the same approach to like your full site architecture and apply it to like a single page, that's kind of what we're talking about with this islands architecture. So if everything is controlled by a single root point in your JavaScript app on the page, like all the content, you're going to have a lot of duplication, because like okay, this paragraph is never going to change, but we're still loading it with and rendering it with JavaScript. So islands architecture is kind of saying, like, don't render that paragraph. Just find the point. If you like walk up, find the point where that contains all the interactive stuff, and then just that'll be the root of your app. And if there's an unrelated thing like a carousel, maybe that carousel is its own island. So if you do that, you can hopefully minimize JavaScript requests.
And it's also fair to say other kinds of requests too. I remember back in the day, I was going to a lot of high performance web application like conferences and such like that. And the first time I heard somebody say that they basically loaded the entire page with let's say it's a product listing page of like 50 products. They would load the page first, and then as soon as the page loaded, then they would load in all the images, the product images. And the reason why is you wanted the UI to kind of snap in. And if you didn't do it that way, there could be blocking or rendering issues and it would load slower. And they'd actually done metrics. I could dig them up. It'd take a while, but like every 10th of a second, the page loaded faster was that much more revenue you could get.
Absolutely. Yep. And that'll be an awesome segue into, I think, let's build.
ITM up, you knock them down.
Let's do it.
With Astro. There we go. So awesome. I have a bit of an app started, but I think we can also just start a new one. Where's my terminal? So I'm just going to make a directory here. Probably bump that font size up.
Yeah, you anticipated my request. That looks good there.
Cool. So I'll just call it Hello Astro. And then it's pretty easy. Just npm init Astro. I'm going to do latest because I might have a local version cached. And then we get this fun little interactive thing. This is
interesting.
Fancy.
Pretty par for the course. But yeah, I'm going to start with the starter kit because it has a cool section here where you can pick what frameworks you want to do.
I love this.
So I'm going to use React, and we'll go with Svelte as well. So it'll generate all that out for us. And then I'll open this up in code. I'm also just going to run npm install. Cool. So yeah, it kind of scaffolds out. It's just installing in the background, but this should look pretty familiar. It's like kind of what you get with Next or a lot of common frameworks. So got our source and public. Public is this thing that we don't touch. And that's like any assets, like your robots file or your favicon. And then your source directory is going to have like pages, and that's file-based routing. And then components, there's nothing special about that, but it's nice to put all your components in there. And it kind of scaffolded it out like this little React counter. That's just a demo, and then like the same thing in Svelte. But if we go into this index.astro, here's this weird format that we can definitely chat about. But we've got this like front matter thing like markdown. But what's inside here in an Astro file is JavaScript that's going to run on the server. And you can import Astro components. You can import framework stuff. One thing to note is like, because we're all in on ESM, you actually need to specify like the extension and everything, valid imports. And then, you can do stuff like items is going to be an array, and you can fetch data here and fun stuff like that. We'll definitely get into it. And then below is just your markup. So you can kind of think of there being like a return statement in front of this. This is what you're going to return from the page. So it's HTML. with these JSX-like expressions. So title, you can do any sort of JavaScript in there.
And is that your own hand-rolled syntax for the templating part? Is it based off anything?
Like syntax highlighting, or
like the curlies around title and that sort of thing? Like, because there's probably other like ways that you can drop in things. Or
yeah, this is all our sort of handcrafted language. So we are working on a new compiler that's going to be powered by WASM. That's going to be really cool. Hopefully we can chat about that a bit more later. But yeah, it's similar to like Svelte's compiler, where you run it through the compiler. It outputs like JavaScript as an intermediate step, and then we render that JavaScript to HTML.
Gotcha.
So yeah, let me run this. Snowpack's going to do its thing. This is like a one-time step. It just kind of prepares everything. If anything's not ESM, it'll convert it and make sure it's all going to work.
Yeah, so line 56 and line 57 are blowing my mind a little bit because I'm very curious what the output is going to be for those. Like,
totally.
Because like, is it like a div and then the div is made into like a mini React container and then the content gets injected in there?
Yeah. So I'm gonna remove that just for a second. Or maybe I'll show both of them. So like I was saying earlier, these are hydration directives is what we call them. So this is saying like, well, first of all, yeah, you can just drop your component in there and it's going to work. You don't need to like set up the mount script or do anything like that. There's no like div ID app.
Yeah. And then like React app whatever with app as a container. Yeah,
totally. So we'll just have this React counter, which again is like it's just a div with some buttons. So that's what's loading here, which is really cool. Get that much bigger.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see here like we've got this. So clicking is not going to do anything because it's rendered on the server. We're just outputting HTML. But in this case, we do want some interactivity. So we can say client visible. Well, let's go with client load. We have a couple different ones of these, but client load, we're going to see that it works.
That's trippy right there. I mean, I know exactly what just happened, and it's fascinating that you rendered it all and it's static, or you didn't render it all and it's client interactive, and it was like a tiniest bit of metadata switch.
Totally. So what happens here is we actually have this Astro root custom element that it doesn't really do anything. It's just kind of a placeholder at the moment. It might do something in the future. But yeah, we have this Astro root, and then here's your React app. You can see the React root here. So we basically also injected this script that just like boots it up. So with the power of like dynamic imports, we can do all this stuff on the fly really easily. And import.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we're importing the React counter, and then we're importing the renderer is what we call them. So there's a bunch of those for your different frameworks. And then we're just passing in like the props and stuff like that. So that's the really simple, like load is just going to say like, whoops, right when you load the page, we're going to dump all that JavaScript out. Go ahead.
So are there any restrictions like with this model? Like, are there any React components that like, if you do this, it's not going to work sort of deal?
Totally. That's a great question. Yeah, there are. If your React component relies on like browser globals, like anything on a window, or like, yeah, if you're like if your component is not ready to be server rendered, then this is not going to work very well, because we are rendering it to static HTML first. We actually just shipped this client only option. Client only equals React. I think that'll work. So this is what you can do in that case, is basically say like, now that we don't have that, let me disable JavaScript really quickly. We're not going to render that on the client. We're just going to render this little placeholder. Then we'll enable JavaScript, and that's only running on the client now. So that's great if you're using third-party components that aren't isomorphic, can't render on the server. You can just say like, cool, only render that on the client.
Stupid question from me, but like, what does render mean? Like, when you rendered your stepper here, it obviously like had a fixed state and it wasn't clickable, because obviously at render time in the server, there's no interactivity there. But like, is there like a choice B where you would be able to render something that would be interactive?
Yeah, I think like the best thing is like client load, but if you wanted to pass props to it, like let's just modify this so it takes like initial count. I think I spelled that wrong. Initial count, and then we'll do that. So default it to 0. And then we want to say like the initial count is going to be, I don't know, 15. That should work. So this is before it's rendered on the client. So this is just server. We basically, under the hood, we're using like render to string from React DOM.
Yeah. So if I had, let's say, like a product configurator component, and I know the user is really interested in product number 7, then I could have it pre-render the product 7. And it would go through whatever process has been configured and then spit out the results of that. So I could have one component for all my products, pass in the IDs as I want, and I'm going to get the rendered components and still be able to keep my encapsulated product configurator component thing in this contrived example.
Totally. So another thing, like when you're talking about that performance hack of like, let's defer the loading of that until the page loads. We have options for that as well. So like, idle will basically defer until the page is like, there's nothing happening on the main thread. So that's a good trick to like speed up loading. Or this is like the one that's always really fun. So client visible. I just got that working. So this is all the JS we're loading on the page now. We have the HMR client and dev, and then this like tiny little visible script, which is setting up an intersection observer. So now as we scroll down the page and that component actually comes into view, then we're going to load all of React and everything that component needs to render.
So for like endlessly scrolling pages, this is ace.
Yeah. Or like, your blog has a comment section at the bottom that loads something up. Like, yeah, if they don't get to the bottom, they shouldn't have to load that component.
See, my blog doesn't have that problem because I don't get any comments, so I don't have to worry about any performance enhancements.
So I have a question with this architecture then. So if I'm not, let's say, because oftentimes when I work on sites like this, I'll have a section where the React sort of approach to building something is kind of nice, like building a component that spits out, like, let's say I put out like different types of like warning blocks, and I say like, oh, I want this warning block, and I take like 3 different props to how it displays, but it's static, right? Like, no, what my like little thing of text is just some HTML. So with this approach, could I write this as a React component, and then would I actually ship React to the client to use it, or would like Astro, like if I put it in, I said I didn't put any props, right? So that I don't have client visible or client anything.
Totally.
Would you still need to render, like would the user still need to download and parse React in order to see my like warning thing that I wrote in JSX?
No. So there's
that's what I. So before you, that's crazy. That's what I thought you were going to say, and I still am having a hard time with my brain.
Black magic.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
We'll just do that, and like, so the React, rename this
because like while you're doing that sort of gets at the point earlier where we talked about, why would you use the React to build something like a simple site or a simple blog? But I get the motivation because I want to do it because I like React and I like the developer experience of being able to do that. And so even if I'm building a handful of components with React, I like doing that. But this is really fascinating because you could kind of use the same developer methodologies and then just not even have to ship it.
Exactly.
Totally.
Like that. I see exactly what you're saying, TJ. And so that way you could have a team of React people making really cool things, and then someone can just plop them into the website and generate it as a static site. And you don't have to pay the overhead of the React stuff, but you get all the benefits of the React tooling, the React ecosystem, all the frameworks, all the pre-built code, all the inbuilt knowledge, the shareability between your spas and your web pages without having to pay the render tax.
Totally. Like, think about design systems here. Like if you have this whole like internal company thing that's built in React, but you're just doing a marketing page, like cool, just drop your title component into Astro and it would totally work. So yeah, you don't have to render it out. And just to prove that I'm not lying here, we'll look at the network panel. There's no JavaScript.
Nice. Down with JavaScript. Oh wait.
Hey, I like JavaScript. So yeah, I actually had another little demo here. If I close that was just kind of a starter app, but I wanted to basically show that off, that if you have this, get this. If you have like some design system like Carbon, so Carbon is IBM's design system, so which is really cool. It's a great React design system. So I just wanted to show a demo of like, yeah, you have this awesome design system. These are all React components. And if I don't load it, I still have, the output up here. But one of the cool things is like, it's actually responsive. So I do want to load it. Let's say client load. So now when we're like actually moving, it's actually loading now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's changing the nav. I see it.
Right. And it has this sidebar on mobile, which is cool. I wanted to look quickly, and I'm looking up the syntax. Even I don't know everything about Astro. I think it's boom. So there's client media, which is another option here. So let's say min width is going to be how do I figure out how big this is? There we go. So 1480. Yeah, I think we actually want. So now what's going to happen is if I'm above that. Maybe that's not working. I think it is.
Yeah, so basically it's like it's like a media query, but for JavaScript almost.
Yeah, so it'll load when it's just a media query. But it can dynamically load components. So if you have like a mobile nav that's totally separate, you can just load that when you need it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like it's all sort of like the same mantra of like, let's find ways to get people to ship as little JavaScript code as possible. Like use this if like only show it when it's visible, or only show it at these dimensions, or like, and it's off by default. I sort of just, I like it's just a consistent approach, right? Of like the whole framework is trying to encourage you to only, or to use JavaScript selectively, I guess would be one way of putting it.
So I just wanted to like talk about data fetching real quick. You can see I have the Astro Pokemon API up here.
And TJ has a big tattoo of a Pokemon on his back. He won't show it to you.
I don't have the tattoo, but if you zoom in, you might see some Pokemon in my background a little bit. So
nice.
I'll leave it at that.
So yeah, just to show like what data fetching looks like. It's really nice, I think, because you can just hit JSON. I forgot await. So top level await supported here. So if you're pulling in, external data sources, stuff like that, you can just say like, yeah, let's get 5 Pokemon here, and then map over the Pokemon. That should be really familiar to everybody.
Yeah, it is funny. Like see, this isn't JSX, but like the syntax feels like the parts of JSX at least you most commonly use, like totally. in the templating stuff.
Yep. Pokemon.map. Oh, okay. So here's another interesting thing. Where this is going to log. So I want to debug this because obviously I did something wrong. So we're saying Pokemon.map is not a function. If I save this and then load this again. Okay, so this logged not on the client, but on the server, because everything up here is server side. So, but that's handy because we can see what I did wrong. So let's just pull out
the results.
Yeah,
I actually like as opposed to like, as I mentioned earlier, I've still got a Jekyll site that I run, and these are like the little bits that like building with JavaScript is quite nice because
totally
like,
yeah, you already know that API.
I already know it. Like logging to the server is fine. That's actually what I would expect with this sort of architecture. But right. Just like knowing the syntax, being able to drop in components where I know they make sense or where they're logical for my app is just kind of nice.
So if we had like a React component already that was like a Pokemon card, we could totally render that out here. I'm just going to do an H1 with their name.
So is that fetch happening at build time or at runtime?
Since we're in dev, it's going to happen when we hit the page, but when we run build, that'll happen at build time.
That's super interesting. So what if part of that was dynamic? Would it then have to happen at runtime, presumably?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think we can probably build some better tools around that, but yeah, right now it's only at build time. If you have a component that runs fetch in like a use effect, that'll definitely run. Like we're not gonna do that, but you might have to do both.
Yeah, but I mean that makes sense though. I mean, there's certain things that are impossible to do.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just a bit. We could definitely keep going down this. Oh, there's one other thing that might be fun. If I know a lot of React code bases are using like CSS and JS, which is a great way to go. We're still working on support for that in Astro, but we do have scope styles that we borrowed from like Vue and Svelte. So if we put
nice.
character in here, we'll just say like red. So those are all going to be red, and it's totally scoped. So we're saying like we put this little hash on there and scope all the styles.
You're selling me. Scope styles is one of the biggest things that I wish React had built in. Like like Svelte has it built in, which I really like. Angular has it built in. Vue, like I don't know why. I don't know. I wish React did it straight up. So
yeah, and these don't leak like through the children, which is cool too. So yeah, scope styles are pretty fun. We've found that like you don't really need CSS and JS if you've got that with your components, but we also have CSS module support, Sass, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm also a proponent of scope styles over CSS and JavaScript, but that's like a religious war that we could spend a whole lot of time on.
Didn't mean to poke the bear there.
So I do want to ask, because a lot of this is for like content sites and such, how does Markdown work within Astro?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I actually worked on our Markdown support. So one really cool thing you can do, this is Astro/components. I've always really wished that there was just like a Markdown component for HTML. So I found myself in an interesting position here in charge of a framework where we can add components. So one cool thing you can do is like embed little snippets of Markdown here.
Oh man. And I assume like this is one of the reasons why you need your own like .astro files, right? Because otherwise this would blow up and like anything else.
Yeah. It would explode.
Totally. Let me just throw div. Cool. So yeah, here we're getting
oh man,
Markdown output. That's pretty exciting. So if you're like mixing in components and stuff on your page, but you have some snippets of Markdown, you can use this Markdown component. Otherwise, we also just support like .md and
so you said file-based routing, so like a hello endpoint is magically there.
Yeah, so let's just gonna grab this. I will yeah, so it's very similar to Next.js, file-based routing. We kind of honestly we tried to do a different API, and then it was just really confusing. So here's our Markdown page, and we're working on like kind of an MDX like thing, but with all the like multi-framework things as well.
That was going to be my next question, just like because ultimately what I want to do is mix and match, or well, I want like Markdown plus is really what I want, because you showed HTML Markdown in HTML, but then I also want to do the opposite, right?
Yeah, like pull in your React component.
Yeah, like right there. Why not?
Yep. So we're working on that. We're not quite there yet, just because I'm a little busy on our new compiler. But as soon as that's shipped, we'll definitely be focusing on getting MDX-like support.
New compiler, you say? Tell me
more.
It's a decent segue because I'm curious, like, what's different? The compiler you're using seems fine. Seems fast.
Yeah, what a good segue. So yeah, it totally
tired
is.
Of bad compilers. Wish you could mix and match things that we're about to see. What if there was a new compiler? Back to you, Nate.
Totally. So there's nothing wrong with our current compiler other than we started working on it back in March, and like a lot of this was like proof of concept stuff. So there are definitely some like monkey patches in there that aren't very good. And it was just time to like rewrite and have a clean thing. One of the nice things about being a project so young is that like we're not going to break everyone by doing that right now. So before we're 1.0, we thought like, let's take the time, make a new compiler. And while we're at it, we might as well do something fun with it. So we're actually writing it in Go. So it's not going to be in JavaScript, which this is actually running in CodeSand or StackBlitz. This is a demo of the new compiler that's written in Go, compiled to WebAssembly, and then just running in Node. So
presumably Go for performance.
Yeah. I know immediately we said we're writing it in Go, and everybody said, why not Rust? And the honest truth is like our team is more familiar with Go. ES build is something we wanted to be really close to. So, it plugs in super nicely with ES build. And we're also using, there's a thing called TinyGo, which is like a very optimized compiler for WebAssembly. So the size is a lot smaller than what you'd get with native Go. And yeah, it's really exciting. So it's, even though our other one was fast, it was like 100, 200 milliseconds. This one is like ridiculously fast, where it's like 10 milliseconds. And it's just really exciting. This is what I've been working on for the past couple of weeks. So yeah, we're really pumped about it.
I think it does matter because lots of times, like for static sites, they can get big, right? And I know, like, even on my blog, the Jekyll compiler is painfully slow on my.
Yep.
I maybe have like 50, 100 pages, right? It's not crazy, but I mean, I've worked on apps at companies that have thousands of pages in these things. It's really not uncommon.
Totally. So as we're getting a lot of interest in Astro, like people are going to start doing this at scale, and what we have right now is not really equipped for that. So this new compiler is going to just be really fast. It's really exciting. I made a joke in our Discord community, which if anyone's interested in this, please hop into our Discord community. It's astro.build/chat. But yeah, I made a joke that there's not going to be any bugs in the new compiler. It's going to be perfect. First time. There will be no issues.
A bold statement.
A very bold statement that I will certainly regret.
As long as you don't use this compiler, it won't cause you any problems.
Yeah, there you go. That's
so. What
one
is
way to guarantee it.
When you ship this? Like, is now the burden on the developer to install a Go environment and also NPM environment, and like what else is involved here from the tech stack?
Totally. That's a great question. So one thing that's really important to us is like making it easy to contribute. So this is going to be in a different repo. If you know Go, that's awesome, and you can contribute to it. But it's just going to be, it's going to be like npm install astro.js/compiler, and that's all you're going to have to do, because it's a WebAssembly binary, so you don't need to install Go or do anything like that. It's kind of this like hybrid approach to JavaScript tooling. So I don't know if you guys saw a couple weeks ago, Rome announced that they're hiring Rust folks, and they're rewriting the entire stack in Rust, which is really exciting. I'm super pumped to see what comes of that. But I think versus like moving everything to a language, WebAssembly gives us this awesome opportunity to like move small pieces, like really, really critical performance parts to WebAssembly, and then keep the rest of the JavaScript tooling, make it easy for people to contribute. with the things that they know, and then like when you're down in the nitty gritty details, like that's when you can go to a different language.
It's an interesting way to think about it. Like you've almost designed, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct this, but you've almost designed the tech stack to make contributions easy, not necessarily like pick the tech stack you like the best, because you're looking for an outcome here, which is a vibrant ecosystem.
Totally. Yeah, we've been investing a lot in our community. Our Discord is popping. Honestly, it's really fun.
Which is in chat now. So if you're watching this and you want to hop in, links in the chat. So
yeah, awesome. So yeah, we've been investing a lot in that. Just there's a lot of interest, and Discord is really fun way to connect with people. So yeah, we're trying to make contributing to Astro, making a better tool, a lot easier for folks.
You've got a fan in the chat as well, Lee Moros. It's been a fantastic community. So we are coming up on our time here. I wanted to give chat one last chance. If you have any questions for Nate about Astro or anything, now is a good time to do that. And Nate, while we're waiting to see if there's any last questions, I'm curious if you could give us like best place to get started, like so you mentioned the Discord. Are there any other resources people need to know about or should check out? Any tutorials you recommend? Hit us up with any of that stuff.
Totally. There's a great summary video that Fireship made on YouTube. That's like Astro in 100 seconds. That's if you couldn't pay attention during my whole long-winded thing, that's a really great intro to it. Also, just astro.build is our website. We're working on a redesign, but this is what we have for now.
I love the logo.
Thank you. I actually made that.
Did you? Wow. It'd be, they say a million monkeys and a million typewriters. It would take a million knees and a million crayons to come up with anything interesting like that. So my hat's off to you if I was wearing a hat.
So actually, I've yet to ask the question. My favorite question to ask: where did the name come from, Astro?
Yeah. Kind of got to like dig back into where we were in March. So it was originally like we just had a code name for it, and then we were talking about like islands and like exploring, and like somehow after like a million back and forth about like, oh, we'll go this direction, somebody was like, what about space? And then somebody said Astro. Someone graciously donated the NPM name to us.
Wow,
and
nice.
that was kind of it.
Did that come from the K-pop band? They just made a generous donation of their NPM namespace.
Yeah, I don't think they were squatting the K-pop name on NPM.
Well, they say there's two hard problems: cache and validation and naming things. So you at least made it through the second problem, and I think the name and the logo are great.
Totally. Yeah, I heard there were actually 4 hard problems: cache and validation, naming things, and off by 1 errors.
Yeah.
That is correct. I love it.
Well, I'm not seeing anything else in chat. Nate, this has been a lot of fun. I think you got something really exciting here. This is super interesting. Is there anything we missed? Anything else to plug? Anything else you think people should know?
I don't think so. I think our Discord, astro.build, is our website. Our docs are up there. Definitely check us out on GitHub. The link's on there. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, Dan, do you have any thing you want to plug here before we hop off?
I'll mention the Enterprise React newsletter. I get it every 2 weeks, and it tells me what's happening in the JavaScript land, and it's sort of tuned for the enterprise class developer. And so I'll put a plug out for that. They've never sold my email address, I know, because I like name my emails funny. So give that a subscribe if it's your kind of thing.
Very cool. And I'm just going to plug the React Wednesdays website. I dropped into the chat right now. So if you enjoyed this, if you're watching this on YouTube, we do this live. You can come in, you can chat. You can ask questions every Wednesday, 1 o'clock US Eastern time. So come hang out with us. We do have no show at least next week and maybe for a while. I'll be on vacation. It's vacation time here in the US, but we will be back after that. And thanks one last time, Nate. This has been a lot of fun. I'm excited to try out Astro.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're still in beta. I think I forgot to mention that, but it is beta, so there might be bugs. Please open an issue. We're well on our way to 1.0 though.
Cool stuff.
Woot woot.
Well, best of luck. I think you got something cool, so I wish you the best.
Thanks very much.
All right, and until next week, everybody. See ya.
Take it easy.